Welcome, everyone. My name is Nina Benoit. I'm the director of Sustainability at Brightest, host of the AI Sustainability podcast, and keynote speaker on AI and sustainability. For first-time listeners, this podcast talks about all things related to artificial intelligence and sustainability, exploring how AI can have a positive impact on our planet and our people, but also what potential limitations or risks we need to be aware of. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Nathalie Sinha. Nathalie is a sustainable finance leader, writer, and public speaker who has made a name for herself at the intersection of climate, sustainability, and finance. She previously served as head of sustainability for the infrastructure investment business at the bank UBS, where she led sustainability strategy for their $7 billion infrastructure portfolio. She has also worked in the water, aviation, and consulting industries. Nathalie, thank you so much for joining us today. I've been really looking forward to this conversation as we planned this episode quite some time ago now already. And I'm really curious to learn more about this very important topic.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
With pleasure. So before we dive in, could you maybe explain to your listeners how banks and asset managers finance AI investments?
Yeah, sure. So AI investments is such a broad field, and there's a whole value chain associated with it. But the backbone that sits behind AI is actually data centers. And data centers are running the whole thing. And without them, the internet and AI wouldn't work. And there's a race to scale AI, which has triggered one of the largest infrastructure build-outs in modern history. So some estimates suggest that data center spending could reach up to 7 trillion by 2030. That insane amounts of money are pouring into it. And finance is such a huge and varied field as well. But essentially, there's the public markets and private markets. And public markets is basically like the stock market, which typically has bigger companies on it, and they're listed on the stock exchange. And then there's private markets, which are privately owned and managed companies. And so data centers can be financed on both the public and private markets. And I used to work in an infrastructure fund, which is in the private markets function of a large bank. And we had money invested across a wide range of different types of companies. So we had energy assets, we had like wind, solar, biogas, gas distribution, gas production even, and then digital investments as well. So fiber companies and data centers too. And so I spent quite a few years working with a data center company, and I learned quite a lot about how that all works. And essentially, these kind of the way that an infrastructure fund works is that you kind of put together an idea for a fund, like types of investments that you want to make. And then you might set up the parameters around that. And then basically you then go to large institutional investors, so like pension funds and insurance companies, and try to fundraise. And then if you're successful in that fundraising, then you might have a few billion. So like mid-market infrastructure funds can range in size quite a lot, but like you're talking about a couple of billion probably. Some of the largest infrastructure funds are like hundreds of billions, which is just an insane amount of money. And then basically, so they fundraise for the fund, and then they'll go and invest that money. And infrastructure funds are like a bit longer life than some other types of investments. So you might hold investments in the fund for at least a few years usually, but it could be 10 to 15 years.
I think it's hard to imagine this amount of money being invested, but it's super interesting to talk to you and understand this a bit more. And so how are data center deals structured then? And what role does sustainability play in an investment?
So data centers is also a huge field, but can generally be broken down into three main types. So there's enterprise data centers, co-location, and hyperscalers. So enterprise data centers are basically like really big companies might say we need a lot of energy and power and to run our operations. So they basically own and manage like their own data centers. Co-location data centers are data centers where there might be lots of different types of clients located in one data center, and that might be because they're smaller companies or they need some help in like managing the data center. And then hyperscalers are like absolutely massive, like they are just gigantic buildings, and they're typically kind of financed by or like run by big tech companies, so people who really need like a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
And so these data centers can be financed with debt or equity. But when you're looking to make any type of investment, you do like a very detailed analysis of the company. So the first kind of screen is whether it fits within the fund's requirements. So you might have a percentage return or a certain amount of money you're trying to make off of an investment. You might have restrictions on the geographic location. So some funds only invest in certain countries.
Mm-hmm.
And also the types of investments that you're looking at. So that's like the first screen. And then for any investment and for data centers, you'd be looking in a lot more detail, like behind that company. So you'd be basically looking at the data center, you'd be looking at its business plan, you'd be looking at its existing clients, the potential expansion that they could have, the track record. You'd look at the management team and who's on the board, what types of staff they have, its location, and various other factors to decide whether it's a good investment. And so in that, when you're looking at making deals, sustainability is one of the many considerations that you would make when you're investing in a data center. So I would say, like, you know, in its narrowest sense, sustainability is probably like 1/10 or like maybe 1/12 of like the consideration that you make. Having said that, though, like sustainability has got huge commercial value for data centers. So power is like the most important consideration when you're thinking about data centers. So, you know, it's both the biggest kind of constraint and the biggest opportunity. So looking at power efficiency is super important because it affects the bottom line. Like energy is their biggest cost, so it impacts profitability. But depending on what type of investor you are, like sustainability may not be make or break. And you can always buy a company and improve its sustainability profile over time. So yeah, I'd say like it's a bit of a complex picture, but it's important, but it's not necessarily make or break. And you know, when you kind of invest in these companies, because you hold them for quite a few years, you can work with them, and there's a lot of things you can do to improve sustainability over time.
Absolutely. And so you already mentioned the difference between equity and debt, right? Um, is there a difference between the way sustainability is integrated in data center financing in private equity or debt investments?
Yeah, it is very different actually. So equity is essentially buying a stake in a company, and you have a lot more rights and access to the company, and you can help shape the direction of it because you essentially kind of like sit on the boards of the companies and you're making decisions alongside them. Whereas with debt, you're essentially providing a loan to them and you're a bit more distanced from the company. So you don't have as much access to shape the direction of the company. But having said that, I think that, you know, there's a lot more debt financing in the world than there is equity. So I think it's a very important piece of the puzzle. And I think it's an area that, you know, is potentially easy to overlook. But debt financing finances a lot like the majority of stuff in the world. So I think there should be more scrutiny and more attention on debt investments. And there's also a huge potential to use debt for good, for better investments and making the world a greener place.
That's definitely a very good idea. And I feel like we should have some entities that are regulating that so that the debt financing can be more sustainable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how are renewable energy and the data centers and AI investments related right now?
So it's quite a complicated picture, but basically power is the main constraint on data center growth. And without power, like data centers just don't work. And so because there's so much demand and growth and money pouring into data centers, there's just not enough energy to go around. So, and data centers aren't going to wait around for people to fix the grid, right? Like these big tech companies, they want to build data centers and they're not going to wait around for the grid to be fixed. So that people are basically building their own power supplies. And renewables are the fastest and cheapest to build. So what's happening is that people are essentially building, wind, solar, like maybe batteries, like alongside their data centers. So they know that they have that reliable power source, like right there beside it. So that's quite interesting. But I think that the other thing I've been following quite a lot is how this energy demand, obviously the positive story is that it's driving renewable energy growth, but it's also potentially driving growth in oil and gas and diesel. And I've even seen like coal. So data centers just need energy. And unfortunately, people will go to any means possible, even if that means like going back to oil and gas and, coal, which is just terrible. So yes, I think that there's just so much demand for energy. People are building renewables, but they're also going back to non-renewable fuels. So like, oil and gas and diesel.
Yeah, this is definitely a trend that we see right now with a lot of data centers using fossil fuel, unfortunately, because there's just not enough renewable energy. So but interesting to see your perspective as well on these kind of companies also building the facilities for renewable energy and so on. But it's a bit of a double-edged sword right now.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really interesting space to watch though, because when like the projections for data centers, obviously there's like billions pouring into it, but there's also like data centers are I think one of the biggest areas of energy growth now and in the future. So it's this stuff is gonna actually reshape energy markets for sure.
Absolutely. So definitely very interesting to keep a close look on it. And as we mentioned already, the energy demand for AI is growing very rapidly, right? What role do you think finance have in responsibly managing the growing environmental impact of AI?
So I think that finance is doing a lot. And I feel like finance often gets like a bad name, right? But actually, when you're on the inside, there is so much that's happening. And, banks and asset managers, they do take this stuff really seriously. Obviously, there's some that don't integrate sustainability, but in general, I feel like there is a lot of appetite in the finance community to take sustainability and the environmental impact of the investments seriously. So I feel like finance has a huge and important role to play, but we can't be the only ones. Like, we honestly need governments to wake up right now. Like, data centers are potentially the next environmental scandal. Like, I feel like data centers are getting away with a lot, to be honest with you. I feel like, there's a lot that they are doing to manage their own energy consumption because obviously it matters to them and their bottom line. But a lot of this stuff is voluntary. There's basically no mandatory, like, there's not really any environmental regulation around data centers at the moment. And I really think that needs to change fast. Like, we need mandated carbon footprint reporting across the data center world. We need to be seeing carbon footprint scope 1, 2, and 3 as the minimum, and maybe information on like the gases that they're using as well, because they use these refrigerant gases that are very, very potent greenhouse gases. But we need regulation that works, right? I know regulation's not a really very popular thing and no one wants extra regulation because it can be a burden. But I feel like, there is such a huge environmental footprint and we just don't know what that is right now. Like, it's because it's not a mandatory reporting, there's a huge hidden footprint that's going on. And I honestly just think it's so crazy. And I was quite surprised when I worked with these data centers, like how light the regulation actually is. So I feel like finance obviously has a role and it takes its role seriously, but we really need policymakers to step up now and to keep pace with the rapid growth and to be honest, to address the environmental risk, because it's actually like pretty bad. Like, I do think it's really quite bad.
Absolutely. And it's obviously an ongoing challenge between Europe and the US, right? With Europe that has started regulations like the EU AI Act, or Germany as well. But of course, a lot of the majority of the data centers are located in the US. So we need the US to step up, probably. And the last question for you, Natalie, how do you see the sector evolving over the coming years?
It is such a fascinating space. Like, I think it's the place to be, right? Like, data centers, AI, this is the place to be. But I think that, so my kind of prediction is more growth. Like, there is so much money pouring into this. But I think what I've found like quite fascinating is how the backlash is growing quite fast as well. Like, I feel like with more growth, there's more backlash, there's more pushback, there's people asking more questions about, like, do we need AI? Is this actually, is this actually helpful? And I feel like compared to even a year ago, people's sentiment feels like it's changed quite a lot. Like, we were kind of almost promised this dream in a way that it was going to change everything and make our lives easier. And I think maybe that's not the reality of what we're actually seeing right now, right? So I feel like, more growth, more scrutiny, more pushback, more questions about it. But I think that with that, there has to be, a more of a focus on sustainability as a license to operate for these companies, because there's communities are already pushing back. People are already asking questions, and I think people are waking up to the impact that AI and data centers is having on our world. So I feel like it's a fascinating like space to watch, but it's definitely gonna not be the most smooth ride. I think there's going to be a lot of frictions that arise as people kind of, pay more attention to the risks that the AI poses.
Absolutely. And we've definitely seen more and more communities stand up and rise against building data centers, and especially when you look into water rights, as you have a lot of data centers in water stressed regions and in locations where there is not enough water already. This is also a big topic and a big issue that is happening right now.
Definitely. They're using so much water. And I think, like there's so they have loads of different types of cooling systems. And one of them actually uses water as a cooling system. And it's actually mind blowing, like the amount of water that they can use. Yeah.
Definitely. And we have a podcast episode specifically to that. So if anyone is interested in learning more about it, and we made an episode last year with Professor Shala Ren talking about this topic. So definitely an interesting episode to listen to as well. Natalie, it's been such a pleasure having you here today. Thank you so much for joining the AI Accessibility podcast and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
Definitely. And for everyone listening, if you like this conversation, please share it with someone you think would like it as well. And make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. My name is Nina Benoit, and this is the AI Sustainability Podcast. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.